I couldn't believe what just happened. My daughter-in-law had just thrown a cardboard box out the front door, and it landed at my feet on the porch. She screamed, "Take your junk and get out of this house, old man." I stood there in the cold November air, staring down at that beaten-up box. And when I finally opened it that night, sitting alone on a park bench with nowhere else to go, I found $920,000 in a bank envelope, and a handwritten letter that made me fall to my knees. But before I tell you what was written in that letter, let me ask you something. Have you ever given everything you had to someone only to be treated like you never mattered at all? Because that was my life for 3 years. And I need you to understand how I got to that park bench before you can understand what that letter meant to me. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county of Jefferson, Georgia. I wasn't a flashy man. I drove a used Ford pickup, bought my clothes at JCPenney, packed my own lunch every single day. My wife Carol used to tease me about it. She'd say, "Walter, you could afford a little more comfort." And I'd always say, "Uncomfortable just fine." We weren't rich, but we were steady. We owned our home outright, a 4-bedroom house on Maplewood Drive that we'd paid off by the time I was 52. We had savings, we had a retirement account, and we had our son Marcus. Marcus was our whole world, only child, smart kid, good heart, played baseball in high school, got a scholarship to Georgia State. Carol and I were so proud of him, we cried at his graduation. Both times, undergrad and his MBA, he went into real estate development and did well for himself. We were proud. We were happy. Then Carol got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March. Gone by September. 6 months. I held her hand until the very last breath, and when she left, she took something out of me that I don't think ever fully came back. Marcus flew home for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks. Before he left, he hugged me at the airport and said, "Dad, you don't have to be alone. We'll figure something out." I didn't know then what he meant by that. I should have asked. 8 months after Carol passed, Marcus called me with an idea. He and his wife Renee had been talking, he said. They wanted me to come live with them in their house in Alpharetta. It was a big house. 5 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a backyard with a deck. Marcus said there was plenty of room, that it would be good for all of us. "You can help with the grandkids when they come," he said. We'd been trying for a while, him and Renee, and I don't like thinking about you rattling around that house alone, Dad. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I prayed on it. I talked to Carol's photograph on the mantle like I always did. And finally I said yes. I want to be honest about Renee. When Marcus first brought her home to meet us, 7 years before all of this, I liked her. She was sharp, well-dressed, confident. Carol thought she was a little cold, but I told Carol that not everyone shows warmth the same way. Renee came from money. Her father owned 3 car dealerships in Tennessee, and she'd grown up with a certain idea of how life should look. I respected that. I figured we just came from different worlds and we'd find our footing. I moved into their house on a Sunday in April. Marcus helped me carry my things up to the guest room on the 2nd floor. It had a window that faced the backyard, and there was a little writing desk in the corner where I could sit in the mornings with my coffee and watch the birds. I told myself this was going to be fine. The first few weeks were pleasant enough. Renee cooked dinner most nights, and I'd help where I could. I fixed the leaky faucet in the 2nd floor bathroom, resealed the driveway, repainted the fence along the back of the property. I wasn't the kind of man who sat still, and I figured if I was going to live in their home, I was going to contribute. Marcus seemed genuinely happy to have me there. We'd sit on the deck after dinner and talk about baseball. about his projects, about memories from when he was a boy. Those evenings felt like something real. But Renee started to change. Or maybe she didn't change. Maybe I just started to see her more clearly. It began with small things. She started making comments about noise. I'm an early riser, always have been, up by 5:30, coffee on by 6. She started leaving notes on the kitchen counter. Please don't run the coffee maker before 7 a.m. Then, please don't use the TV in the living room during the day. I work from home and the sound carries. Then a typed list, printed out and laminated, of what she called house guidelines. There were 11 items on the list. One of them said, guests should coordinate with Renee before inviting visitors to the property. I was listed as a guest. In my son's house. I didn't say anything. I adjusted. I made my coffee quietly. I moved to my room during her work hours. I stopped having my old friend Raymond over for our weekly checkers game without texting Marcus first. I told myself this was her home and her rules, and I was the one who had come into their space. But then Renee started talking to Marcus about money. I didn't hear it directly at first. I heard it the way you hear things in a house, through walls, around corners, in the silence after a door closes. She was telling him that having me there was increasing their expenses, that my presence was affecting her ability to focus on her work-from-home business, which was some kind of lifestyle consulting that I never fully understood, that a man my age needed more support than they could realistically provide. I heard her say, one evening in their bedroom, Marcus, your father is not our responsibility. He has money. He should get his own place. I lay in my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and I thought about Carol. I thought about the 31 years I'd worked, the lunches I'd packed, the clothes I'd bought at J.C. Penney. I thought about Marcus's college tuition, his MBA, the $40,000 I'd given him as a down payment on this very house. Not a loan. A gift, because I loved my son and I wanted him to have a good start. I didn't say any of this. I kept quiet. Over the next several months, Renee's management of the household expanded in ways I can only describe as systematic. She began involving herself in my finances without being invited. She found out, through a conversation Marcus had carelessly left her in on, that I had significant savings, the proceeds from selling the house on Maplewood Drive after I'd moved in, plus 3 decades of retirement contributions. She started making suggestions. Maybe I should invest with her cousin who ran a private equity firm in Nashville. Maybe I should consider putting some of my assets into a joint account for ease of management in case of a health emergency. Maybe I should update my estate documents to reflect my new living situation. Each suggestion was delivered calmly, practically, as if she were simply helping me think through logistics. And each time something in my gut said no, I smiled and thanked her and changed the subject. Then Marcus sat down with me one afternoon and said something that I felt in my chest, like a stone dropping into water. He said, Dad, Renee and I have been talking, and we think it might make sense for you to sign the house over to us. I stared at him. What house? The house on Maplewood. I know you sold it, but the money from the sale, we thought maybe you could put it toward a joint account, for the family, for the future. I asked him what he meant by for the family. He looked uncomfortable. He looked for just a moment like the 12-year-old boy who used to come to me when he'd broken something and was trying to figure out how to tell me. Renee thinks it would be a cleaner arrangement, he said. You're living here. We're covering costs. It would just make sense for the finances to be more integrated. I asked him if Renee had suggested this. He didn't answer directly. He said, It's something we've both been thinking about. I said I needed some time to consider it. He nodded and left the room, and I sat there alone in the guest room with the window facing the backyard, and I watched a cardinal land on the fence and sit there very still. And I thought, My son is asking me to hand over my life savings because his wife told him to. I didn't sleep that night. I called my attorney, a man named Gerald who I'd used for 30 years, and I told him everything. He listened carefully, and when I finished, he said, "Walter, do not sign anything. Do not transfer anything. And I think you need to start making some plans." I asked him what kind of plans. He said, "The kind a man makes when he realizes his situation might change quickly." I started to notice other things after that. Renee had begun opening my mail. I found envelopes on my desk that had been resealed, not carefully enough. She had apparently been speaking to my bank, claiming to be my healthcare proxy, which she was not. Gerald discovered this and sent a formal letter to the bank flagging the unauthorized inquiries. When I told Marcus what had happened, he went quiet. Then he said, "Dad, she was just trying to help. She was worried about you." I said, "Marcus, she told the bank she was my medical proxy. That's not worry, that's something else." He stood up and walked out of the room. The relationship in the house became cold after that. Renee stopped speaking to me directly. She communicated through Marcus or through those laminated notes. Meals became separate. She and Marcus ate together in the dining room while I ate alone in the kitchen. I was 67 years old, and I was eating alone in my son's kitchen like a boarder who'd fallen behind on rent. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in January, Marcus came to my room and said Renee had asked me to leave. He said it quietly. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said there had been too much tension and that it wasn't working and that I would be more comfortable somewhere else. He said he'd looked into some senior living communities nearby that were really nice. I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 41 years old, and he was standing in the doorway of my room, and he was telling me to leave because his wife had told him to tell me to leave, and he could not look me in the eyes. I said, "Marcus, I need you to look at me." He raised his eyes. I said, "I gave you everything I had, your education, your down payment, your whole beginning, and I never asked you for a single thing in return, not one thing." I paused. "And I'm still not asking, but I want you to know, and I want you to remember, that I know what's happening here." He said, "Dad." I said, "I'll be packed by Saturday." I started putting my things in boxes. I didn't have that much. I'd sold most of the furniture from Maplewood before the move. 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books, my toolbox, Carol's photograph, a few other things that mattered. On Saturday morning, I carried everything downstairs and stacked it by the front door. Renee was in the kitchen. She walked past me without a word. Then she came back into the entryway holding an old cardboard box, one of the ones I'd used to move things in, and she set it down in front of me and said, "I found some of your things in the hall closet." Her tone was the same tone she used to tell the cleaning service which products to use on the hardwood floors. I picked up the box. I didn't look inside. I carried it out to the porch. Marcus brought the rest of my bags out and loaded them into the truck. He said he'd arrange for me to stay at an extended stay hotel in Dunwoody while I figured out my next steps. He'd paid for 2 weeks. He tried to shake my hand. I let him. I drove to the hotel. I checked in. I sat down on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner, and I looked at that cardboard box sitting on the floor. I almost didn't open it that night. I almost pushed it into the corner and left it for another day. But something made me reach down and pull back the flaps. On top, there was a folded piece of paper, a receipt from a hardware store. Below that, 2 books I'd thought I'd lost. Below those, wrapped in a dish towel I recognized from Carol's kitchen, was a thick manila envelope, sealed, My name written on the outside in handwriting I knew as well as my own. It was Marcus's handwriting. My hands were trembling when I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on 3 pages, and beneath the letter was a bank document. A wire transfer confirmation. $920,000 transferred into an account in my name at a credit union in Atlanta. The transfer had been executed 4 days earlier. I read the letter. I'm going to tell you what it said, but I want you to sit with this for just a moment first, because everything I'm about to share, I've thought about every day since. Marcus wrote, "Dad, I know you're reading this in that hotel room, and I know you're hurt, and I know you have every right to be. I need you to know that I see everything clearly now. I have seen it for a while. I have been a coward, and I have failed you, and there is no excuse for that." He wrote that he'd known for almost a year that Renee had been attempting to access my financial accounts without authorization. He wrote that he'd discovered she had forged a letter using his name, attempting to transfer a portion of my retirement funds into a private account she controlled. Gerald's intervention had stopped the transfer, but Marcus had seen the documents. He wrote that he'd confronted her, that she had not denied it, that their marriage was, in his words, over in every way that mattered, even if the paperwork hadn't caught up yet. He wrote that the $920,000 was my money. Not a gift, not a loan. It was the proceeds from the sale of the Maplewood house, plus interest he'd quietly accumulated in a protected account he'd set up 18 months ago when he first began to understand what Renee was doing. He'd been moving my money, piece by piece, into safety. He wrote, "I couldn't stop her from making your life miserable in that house. I was not strong enough for that. But I could protect what was yours, and I did." He wrote, "I am so ashamed of what I allowed to happen under my roof. I don't ask you to forgive me now. I only ask that you know I never stopped loving you, and that I never stopped being your son, even when I wasn't acting like it." The last line said, "Call me when you're ready. I'll be here." I sat on the edge of that hotel bed for a very long time. I called Gerald the next morning. He confirmed the account, confirmed the funds, confirmed everything was clean and legal and mine. He also told me that Renee had been served with divorce papers the previous week, and that a separate investigation had been opened regarding the forged transfer attempt. Gerald said, depending on how things developed, she could be looking at felony charges. I sat with that information for a while. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I felt something more like the way the air feels after a long storm. Cleared out, quiet, still a little raw. I called Marcus 3 days later. He picked up on the first ring. He said, "Dad." I said, "Marcus." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I said, "I read the letter." He said, "I know. Gerald told me you'd called." I said, "I know. Gerald told me you'd called." I said, "You should have come to me sooner." He said, "I know. I'm sorry, Dad." "I'm so sorry," I said. "I know you are." I paused. "You're still my son." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then I heard him exhale, and it sounded like something releasing, like a door opening after being stuck for a long time. We talked for 2 hours that night. He told me things I hadn't known. How Renee had been building her case against me from almost the beginning, framing every repair I made as me trying to control the house, framing every boundary I crossed as evidence that I couldn't live independently. Slowly convincing him that his own father was a burden. Marcus said, "She was so good at it, Dad. She made everything seem logical. She made me doubt what I knew was true, and I let her because I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of that." I told him about the cardinal on the fence, the night he'd asked me about the money. He laughed a little bit. Then he got quiet. He said, "You knew then, didn't you?" I said, "I knew something." He said, "Why didn't you say anything?" I said, "Because I wasn't sure it was my place to pull you out of your own marriage. A man has to see the truth himself. I could only wait." 3 months later, I bought a house. A smaller one this time. 3 bedrooms, 1 story, easy to maintain. Older neighborhood, big trees, a front porch where I could sit in the evenings. I found a cardinal feeder and hung it in the backyard. And that first spring, they came. Marcus came to help me move in, just the 2 of us, like when I used to help him move boxes in college. We worked all day, and then sat on the porch as the sun went down with 2 bottles of sweet tea, and we didn't need to say much. Renee ultimately pled guilty to 1 count of attempted financial fraud. She received 3 years of probation and was required to complete 200 hours of community service. Her attorney had argued for leniency. The judge, a woman in her 60s who listened to the full account, looked at Renee over her glasses and said, "You took advantage of a grieving widower who had done nothing but love his son. I want you to think about that every single day of your probation." I was in the courtroom for that. I didn't go out of anger. I went because Gerald said my presence mattered, and because I thought Carol would have wanted me to see it through. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Marcus put his arm around my shoulders and said, "It's done, Dad." I said, "It's done." We stood there for a moment in the afternoon light, and I thought about that cardboard box and the manila envelope and the 3 pages of handwriting from my son. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything, not the money, but the thing that mattered underneath it. The knowledge that my son was still the boy I'd raised, that somewhere inside the man who had stood in that doorway unable to meet my eyes, there was still someone who loved me enough to protect me quietly, in the only way he knew how, even when he wasn't brave enough to do it openly. I don't tell this story to make Renee the villain and leave it at that. Greed is a complicated thing. So is fear and weakness, and the way a strong-willed person can gradually reshape someone you love into a version of themselves you don't fully recognize. I tell this story because I think a lot of people know what it is to feel erased in a place that was supposed to be home, to be treated like a burden by people who once called you family, to wonder if the love you gave your whole life actually mattered to anyone. It mattered. And if you're sitting somewhere tonight feeling like it doesn't, like you gave everything and got a cardboard box on a porch in return, I want you to hear me when I say, keep going. The letter is coming. Maybe not the way mine did, but the truth has a way of finding its way out if you give it time. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I have a porch, a cardinal feeder, and my son's phone number saved at the top of my contacts. And I am doing just fine. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been made to feel like they don't belong in their own family, share it with them. That's why I'm here. That's why we do this. I'll see you in the next one.